We may be a small fish in a big pond, but I think we're a colorful one.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. Well, I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, His Excellency Georg Sparber, Ambassador of the Principality of Liechtenstein to the United States. Before we dive in, here are a few things I think you should know about today's guest. Number one, Ambassador Sparber is a seasoned diplomat with deep multilateral experience. From disarmament negotiations at the United Nations in New York to strategic postings in Vienna with the OSCE and IAEA, he's tackled some of the world's most pressing global challenges with intellect and diplomacy. Number two, he represents one of the world's smallest yet most globally engaged nations. Liechtenstein, nestled in the heart of Europe, is a constitutional monarchy known for its innovation, strong rule of law, and commitment to human rights. In addition to his role in Washington, Ambassador Sparber serves as Liechtenstein's permanent observer to the Organization of American States, broadening the Principality's reach across the Western Hemisphere. And lastly, he's a scholar at heart and a public servant by calling. Holding a doctorate in philosophy and educated across Lausanne, Paris, and the United States, Ambassador Sparber blends academic rigor with practical leadership. Since joining Liechtenstein's Foreign Service in 2009, he has steadily earned trust and responsibility on the international stage. Ambassador Sparber, you have been called a diplomat, a scholar, a principled voice for global cooperation, and even a ceremonial pitcher for the Baltimore Orioles. Today, we're thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thanks for having me on your show. It's great to be here. I'll look forward to our conversation.
Well, we're really thrilled to have you. I think that, a lot of folks may need to learn a little bit about Liechtenstein, and so that's part of what we'll do today. But I just wanted to start off with a moment that not every ambassador gets, throwing out the first pitch at a Major League Baseball game. Were you nervous? And what did it mean for you to represent Liechtenstein in that way?
Well, you bet I was nervous because, a very good friend of mine, I think, put this very well. We Europeans are much better at kicking a ball than at throwing one. So for one, made me pretty nervous. And also in the weeks prior to the big event, there was no lack of people sending me videos on YouTube with the worst failures of first pitches. Yes, I was nervous, but it was an incredible experience and the honor of a lifetime, really, to stand in the middle of that stadium, Oriole Park, throw the first pitch with an Orioles jersey on and Liechtenstein on the back, and great atmosphere. And I have to say, spectators were very kind and forgiving to me.
You think this is going to make baseball more popular back home?
I certainly got a little bit of a response from back home when I shared that video. Yeah. So we'll see.
That's great. I mean, it was a really cool opportunity, I think, to make sure that, some sports fans in the United States learned a little bit about Liechtenstein because, a lot of people may not be familiar. I wonder if you could talk about, what do you want Americans to know about Liechtenstein? How do you describe it, and what makes your country unique on the global stage?
That's a dangerous question to ask me because I can go on for hours and I'm make to talk about this. But, Liechtenstein is a unique country, I'd say, in many aspects. And first and foremost, for me, it's simply the most beautiful place. It's nestled in the Alps with great mountains, hiking in summer, skiing in winter. And of course, I grew up there, but there's this just very special feel to it that many people who have visited it, I think, share. But there's this little village, for example, in the mountains not far from where I grew up, that was just voted the 14th most beautiful village on Earth by Forbes magazine. And I think that tells you something about what you can see in Liechtenstein. But aside of, its beauty, Liechtenstein is also, it's a very successful economy. We're a country of entrepreneurs. We build things, and we do that also here in the US. And you mentioned our role on the global stage. We take that very seriously, our international engagement. Liechtenstein is a strong advocate for international law and accountability. We believe in free societies and free economies. And we also believe that, a just and prosperous world for all is a world where Liechtenstein can thrive in. So that's a very important part of our international engagement. And lastly, I'd say maybe even if we're a small country, people don't know that Liechtenstein has been around for quite a long time, more than 300 years. We are a constitutional monarchy. As you said in your intro, we are the Principality of Liechtenstein, but we also have an elected parliament and a government, quite far-reaching direct democracy rights that allow people to have an immediate say on everything that they want. And I think with that system, we're probably quite unique in the world.
That's amazing. I had the opportunity back when I was in high school to have a brief visit to Vaduz, Liechtenstein. I was going on one of those 3-week trips with my German classmates. I was studying German, and we went through Germany and Austria and Switzerland. And I remember we were so excited when they said, we're going to go through another country, and a country that we weren't super familiar with. And yeah, it was so beautiful, as you said. But we knew it was small, and we knew it was special. We didn't know too much about it, and it's always stuck with me. But as you've said, Liechtenstein, it's small in size, but there's actually more of Liechtenstein in the United States than people think. What are some of the surprising ways that your country shows up here that Americans may not be aware of?
Our economy, and that's not so much known to people here, is really dominated by sort of high quality industry and manufacturing. In some of the niche areas, we can be world leaders, and our companies are in a number of surprising areas. That's really also our footprint here in the US. For example, we produce car parts in Indiana or dental implants in New Jersey. Some of the greatest Hollywood smiles come courtesy of our famous dental company. Or if you pass a construction site in the US, you often see these red tools and boxes hanging around from our flagship company, Healthy, who is a company providing thousands of jobs here in the US and has been here for a very long time and very successfully. Also important, we have a company called Neutrik that is very famous for its unmatched quality in sound connectors. So if you watch the State of the Union, or if you go to any decent heavy metal concert, for example, it's a Liechtenstein component that makes that possible. And, one thing I'd say is that this has two very important benefits for me as the ambassador. First of all, I get to travel the country a lot because I want to see how our companies are doing, and I just simply love visit our factories. And second, United States is right now seeking to really rebuild its industrial sector, its industrial bases. And I see us being a great partner in this because that's what we're already doing, and that's what we're ready to do much more in the future.
You really understand our audience, because when you talked about sound connectors, you led with State of the Union before heavy metal concerts. So you know that a lot of our listeners are maybe they like heavy metal, but they're more likely to definitely watch the State of the Union. So I love that. Um, as you talk about sort of the travel that you do across the country, visiting these manufacturing facilities and getting to know the Liechtenstein companies that have a presence here, I wanted to talk about how the influence of your country has evolved over time in the United States, because it's only been, I don't know, a little over 20 years, I think, since Liechtenstein made the decision to open an embassy in Washington, D.C., even though your country's been around for 300 years. You didn't have that presence until recently. Why was that such a pivotal step? And what has that physical presence here in DC enabled you to do as a country and as the ambassador?
Well, that's a very good question because, people probably don't know that we have a very selective international presence. And the decision to open an embassy for a country like mine is not an easy one. We only have a total of 8 diplomatic representation in the world. Most of them, of course, in our immediate neighborhood in Europe. But the US is just and has always been such an important partner for us in economic and in political terms that it has made a lot of sense to open this embassy some, I think, 22 years ago. And I have to say, being here in DC, physically present, makes all the difference. Not only if you need to solve problems, but really to build these lasting partnerships that you can rely on later on to that build really the backbone of our diplomatic relations today. Not many people in DC come across Liechtenstein by themselves, I would say. But with our presence here, I believe we're a quite visible member of the DC community. We may be a small fish in a big pond, but I think we're a colorful one. And, building these personal relations often grows opportunities that you haven't seen before. And that is for sure a very rewarding aspect of my job here.
Well, certainly, I think throwing out the pitch at the Orioles game is a proxy for how your physical presence showing up has really helped you to get noticed, because not a lot of ambassadors have had the opportunity to do that, or maybe some of them have been invited and weren't brave enough to say yes, like you were. I want to kind of switch gears to just talk about the role that Liechtenstein plays globally. I know your work spans both bilateral and multilateral diplomacy. When we think about influence and the role of, kind of impacting change when we are part of a group and we can't make those decisions on our own, I mean, you often find yourselves in that position as a smaller country, but part of larger bodies where you can really make an impact behind the scenes and by getting folks on board, building consensus. How do you decide when to act alone and when to act together? And what are some of the things you've learned about how to influence when you're just one party in a multilateral conversation?
Well, let me maybe begin by saying that right now, for my job, the really dominant agenda is the bilateral relation with the United States, and that's a very big task. It's incredibly multifaceted. It includes the full range of topics, say from culture to education or the economy to security. And we do talk about these things not only to the administration, of course, but also with Congress and thought leaders here in DC and all across the country. And my job does go far beyond DC. Also, I have to say, it goes into the states, also to the local levels of governance at times. But there are a number of areas, where Liechtenstein and the US have worked together really well in multilateral diplomacy as well. For example, calling out Russia for its illegal war of aggression against Ukraine has been such an area, or fighting illicit financial flows associated with international crime be another one. You mentioned that I'm also the permanent observer to the Organization of American States, and that is a very good platform for these issues. But also the United Nations, of course, in a way, our main platform for multilateral diplomacy is really key in our foreign policy. And I have myself, worked the better part of my career in the United Nations, so I know that platform very well. It allows us to really form coalitions with other states to advance certain topics that are important to us, and it's a very, very fruitful area of engagement for us and a very important one. So at the end of the day, I think you decide probably on a case-by-case basis which things you advance on the bilateral level, which ones you want to take to the multilateral level. But if you have an issue that's important, both of you bilaterally, it's kind of natural to see whether you can advance it, further in bigger coalitions with other states. And that's what we've been doing pretty consistently. And I think as a small state, we also have certain expertise how to do that, how to do this coalition building around an issue up to a majority or a critical mass that really makes a difference later on.
One thing that's changed a lot just in terms of all of our consumption of information, and certainly this has, impacted your work, is social media. And I wonder if you could talk about how outside of, the in-person physical influence that we've discussed, how you use platforms like LinkedIn or other digital tools to extend Liechtenstein's reach and your own reach, while maintaining diplomatic nuance.
Yeah, I mean, social media has certainly grown a lot in importance, even during my brief time in the diplomatic service now. But maybe let me start by saying the other thing first, the first part first, and that
Sure.
is that I really do believe in people-to-people contacts as the most lasting way for us as Liechtenstein to make an impression. You want people to know, you want people to know your country, get a feeling where you stand, also what you oppose at times. And I think that builds the sort of trust that allows you to talk about issues that are important to us more generally. My sense is always if people have been to Liechtenstein, like yourself, or have been guests at our embassy for talks or even just social occasions, they develop a sort of interest and affinity for us that is really priceless if you want to address substantive issues. Um, I don't think we will be ever successful by flooding the zone with Liechtenstein. First of all, I don't think we could sustain that with the limited resources we have.
Yes.
But it's also different, secondly, to differentiate in your messaging, I find. And that's what we often have to do in our exchanges to move our interests forward. So that's also a little bit our approach, how we use social media. And we have, for a while now, used LinkedIn as our main social media channel. My experience has been quite good so far. The interesting point with that social media platform is really that it gives us access to the US audience and allows us to convey certain messages, but it's also quite popular at home. So we try to post messages that are interesting for the US audience, but also showcase a little bit the work of the embassy to our own population, who like the fact that the messages you convey through that channel, they stay a bit longer in the algorithm, which allows it to us at least to keep it manageable with the resources we have. And I have to say the feedback we receive is quite positive, but even if it's critical, it's generally decent. I also do have a personal account side of the embassy account on LinkedIn. I often do get direct messages, and I do like that level of personal engagement that you can have there. So I think we'll probably stay with that channel or that platform for some time to come.
And I think that's worth underscoring for a couple reasons because, you talked about the importance of relationship-driven diplomacy, and then where you concluded was you talked about how you're using LinkedIn not just through the embassy's page, but through your own page, and people are sending you direct messages. And not all ambassadors, in fact, I think that most of them don't. In fact, in Washington, have a LinkedIn page. Some of them just have no presence on there personally. Maybe their embassy's page has one, but they don't personally. So you're kind of a pioneer in that you have that and that you're using it to continue to foster relationships that you're building in person. Were you hesitant to set up a personal page on LinkedIn? And can you say more about that experience? Because it's obviously really growing in lots of sectors, but in diplomacy, it's actually, just kind of at the early stage, I would say. And you're definitely on the forefront because of how you have your own page and you're, posting to it, et cetera.
I did have a LinkedIn account quite a long time, but I had really not used it that much. So yeah, I took a deliberate decision to sort of activate it for this role I'm in now as Liechtenstein's ambassador in the US. And I just thought I'd give it a try and see if it's manageable for me. I guess it helps that I don't have, 10 million followers, and it's the volume is quite okay to deal with for me. And as I said, I like that level of engagement that I have, and sometimes, you know, um, very interesting things come out of these conversations that you can have with people directly on that platform. So for me, I have to say, really a positive experience.
What advice would you give to another ambassador who's maybe coming to Washington and hasn't used LinkedIn personally before? Would you say dive in?
I would say so, yeah. I would say give it a try. And after a year, you evaluate, you think about what you were able to do, maybe what others are doing on other platforms. You can also follow that and compare. I'd remain very open. I do remain very open also in my mindset when it comes to social media. And there may be a time when we will maybe change strategy on that. But for the time being, I think we're doing pretty okay with what we have. Yeah.
Maybe we'll see you on TikTok one of these days.
Maybe. Maybe.
Don't want to commit. I want to kind of pivot back to Liechtenstein. The country has a reputation as a strong financial center, but you've also emphasized what Liechtenstein's companies produce and contribute, globally. I just want to hear a little bit more about how you help others see the full picture. You're certainly seeing it as you travel around the United States, but what are some of the ways that you've found are effective to get that message out to policymakers and opinion leaders so that they understand the full picture of what your country is all about?
Well, the interesting thing is when it comes to the US, as I said in the beginning, it's really quite dominated by our industrial footprint here, but people do have, knowledge of Liechtenstein as a financial center. So I do talk a lot about that as well. And I'd say how I go about it, I think you can hear it like today in your podcast too. I talk a lot, I try to engage with many different audiences to give people a comprehensive view of what Liechtenstein is. I love going to universities, engage the students. I often talk to businesses and think tanks. I love traveling, as I said, also to places where I haven't been, to meet people that, can range from Rapid City in South Dakota to Miami Beach. So very diverse situations, very diverse people. But one thing I can say for sure, I always leave from these places with a very positive experience and, new people that we can work with, that we can build relationships with. So that's really one of my favorite things to do in my job.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. That's great. You've also have been part of, some other really interesting events and somber events. You laid a wreath at Arlington National Cemetery in honor of a Liechtensteiner who died at Pearl Harbor. What did that moment represent to you and to your country's connection to the U.S.?
Well, that was a very solemn, I'd say, and very moving experience, really. So there's this young man, Laverne Nick. His family and friends called him Bud. He was a citizen of the US. He was born here, but his grandparents emigrated from Liechtenstein. And he did die as a young soldier in the Pearl Harbor attacks. But he was only laid to rest in 2022 when his remains were fully identified through DNA technology.
Hmm.
So to honor him at Arlington National Cemetery, in a way, was a very strong symbol of our connection to the United States. Historically, we have seen at least three major waves of Liechtenstein immigrants to the US in the 19th and very early 20th century. And, the nice thing about this event was that it has also allowed us to connect to the family of Batnik, who, for many generations now are very proud Americans, but they never forgot their Liechtenstein roots. And I thought that was very touching in a way. And there's also, I think, a bit of a more general important aspect to it, and that is that Liechtenstein itself as a country has not had an army for more than 150 years, but people in Liechtenstein will never forget that the United States has liberated Europe from the Nazis 80 years ago. And those events are still in the minds of our people. And I do think people think about it more often even today as, Russia has brought back war to our continent. So that was, in a way, another meaningful aspect of laying that wreath at Arlington National Cemetery.
Yeah, and I think it really highlights like you said, the roots that, that's something that makes America unique is, you have people from all over, their families are from all over, and people do remember those roots. And so it's special that you were able to participate in that and connect with the family after so many years. When you are a small country, I think our listeners, we have people from associations, from healthcare, from lots of walks of life. Sometimes they may feel like they're the underdog in terms of making a big change in the world. And you represent a small country, but you've taken a really strong stance on global issues like combating human trafficking and modern slavery. Um, I wonder if you could share a little bit about how Liechtenstein engages on these topics. This is kind of back to our multilateral conversation, but I'm especially thinking about it from the angle of a leader who might be listening in, who their organization may not be the biggest in the field, but they have strong convictions and they want to think about how they can play a role collaborating with others, perhaps as part of a coalition. Your country is just such a great example of how a small group of people can make a huge impact on major global challenges. And so how do you all approach that? And how have you personally, since you've represented your country at the UN and in other forums in that way?
Well, thank you for saying that. That's very kind, and that's certainly what we try to do. We try to be sort of a principled and steadfast voice on certain things, and we try to focus on issues where we can have positive impact. Let's say, modern slavery you mentioned as an example. It's really an outrageous crime that should have been rooted out a long time ago. Still, there's estimates that say that almost 50 million people live in slavery-like conditions today. It's one of the
Well,
worst crimes imaginable, and yet it generates huge amounts of criminal money benefits. Very few criminals get caught or are successfully prosecuted. So this is an area where we thought, wait, we have some know-how in our financial center on how to track illicit financial flows. And maybe we can help identify criminal funds from human trafficking around the world through that knowledge and thereby, also contribute to increase accountability for this crime. And the initiative that has grown out of this is called FAST, which stands for Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking. It has developed over a few years now and developed very well. It's now run by the United Nations, but of course we still actively support it. And the issue is so grave and so widespread that certainly we can use every voice in support of fighting modern slavery.
and I guess I'm wondering, as you approach that, do you have any advice for other leaders that want to make a difference where they have to get others rallied around it? It sounds like one piece is, you sort of identified a core capability you had, which was we really understand the world of finance, so we can identify illicit transactions. And so you sort of brought that to the table. But just would love to know if you have any other advice for leaders that might be looking to tackle big issues when they aren't, necessarily seen as the ones who would be at the forefront. You probably weren't. People didn't expect Liechtenstein to be the country that was going to lead that initiative, I suspect, until you took the leadership role.
Well, I do think sometimes if you're a smaller player, what you have to work for really is to, grow credibility in what you're doing. And I think you do that at least in two ways. First of all, you have to be consistent. You have to be consistent in what you advocate for and what you think is important. You have to be consistent in also considering global problems as your own problems and think about what your contribution to a solution can be. And then I think credibility also emerges for you when you have expertise and know-how in a certain area that you can rely on. The small ones often have to be better at doing things than the bigger ones to make an impact. But that's also the aspiration you should have. You should build your expertise in areas where you can, and then you should make it available to everybody. And I think that together has sort of also an appeal for other countries to team up and to pool efforts. And I think that's a very good basis for broader coalition building around an issue, as I think, quite successfully done in this area. But certainly much more work needs to be done there.
That's great advice for anyone looking to be part of or to build a coalition. I want to ask you, right now we have nonstop news and global noise across all our devices. And I imagine that the role of a diplomat has evolved. It used to be that you might have to send a cable home with what's happening in Washington. And now the people at home might have already read it on a post on X or something like that. So could you share a little bit about how that role has evolved, and maybe what's the value of the clarity and the calm that a diplomat can provide in today's world?
Well, that's a very good question, I have to say, because I think I also personally had my time of reckoning with that, or with what a diplomat's work actually consists in today and possibly tomorrow. I mean, you said it, the pace of news and new developments is truly breathtaking at the moment, and you have to find ways to adjust to that. And in a way, I think there's a few different aspects to this. First of all, when it comes to the relationship between Liechtenstein and the United States, we need, of course, at all times to have a very good understanding of the policy developments that are relevant to us. And you said it, many of these, break on social media today or on live TV, which is demanding because all of it is accessible to everybody at the same time. What's not available to everybody, though, is a judgment call. What exactly is relevant and in what sense? And that, in a way, remains the key role of the embassy in its function as an advisor to our own government. There's a big need and an increasing need maybe for us to filter, to weigh, to analyze. And at the same time, the liberty to disregard certain things that are not important has maybe also increased. So I guess in short, we need to be more focused and sometimes take more of a distance to the news cycle than before, but there is areas where we also need to dive in and immediately do so. I'd also say we continue, of course, to really cherish and invest into our network of personal relationships, which still gives us privileged access to information and a level of, let's say, bilateral engagement that's also pretty resilient to the daily developments. That also sometimes brings a measure of let's say, calm distance to a very busy environment. I mean, but as I said, there are of course situations where you need to act fast and decisive, and situations for crisis diplomacy, I'd say. That I would say is probably more of a consequence of the times we live in than a question of, the communication channels or how the news are breaking and in what form. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably my answer to that.
Well, what I'm hearing a little bit is obviously we talked a lot about how you're trying to influence the United States, the people of the United States and the leaders of the United States to understand the important role that you play. But also, you're influencing back home members of your own government. And they are trusting you for your judgment, your ability to analyze and filter information because of the relationships that you've built. And those are some of the keys. I think judgment being really a big one that you mentioned to your ability to influence the people that you need to influence as part of your role. And I think that's a really good reminder to everyone because there are certainly things that we can do where we act really fast and maybe we have to retract what we said. And that, could diminish the
Yeah.
trust in one's judgment. And so you have to be very judicious so that you can maintain that level of influence that you have built both back home and, of course, here in Washington and across the United
I
States.
think you're absolutely right with that. And people usually only see one aspect of that, but the work of the embassies is very much a two-way street. And, the United States is in everybody's mind back home and in Europe. And there's a lot of reporting, not only, from US media that people follow, but through our own media. And so the US is in everybody's mind all the time, and you need, as a government, also to have a little bit of your ear on the pulse of where things are really headed. And I think that's always been a part of diplomacy. That's the least visible part from the outside, I would say, but certainly a very important one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as we close, I want to ask you, I mean, you're quite a Renaissance man. You've been a philosopher and a snowboarder, a hunter, and now even a pitcher at a baseball game. Uh, with all that and your experience both in multilateral and bilateral conversations representing your country, Liechtenstein, I'd love to hear, how do you define influence today? And how has that definition evolved for you throughout your career?
You keep coming back to that pitch rockets. To ever throw a ceremonial pitch again in my life would be probably really pushing my luck too much, but we'll see. But your question on influence, I think is a very good one. And, interestingly, I have dealt with it to some degree, even during my time when I was studying philosophy. Philosophy, there are many different theories of what influence really is. And I do think at the end of the day, you've influenced a person or a process, if you left a trace, if you have created like a potential, that can evolve into something concrete later on. Doesn't have to, but can. And I always thought about it in terms of, a counterfactual. For example, would we have had this person's support for, let's say, stronger academic ties between Liechtenstein and the US if she had not traveled to Liechtenstein, spoken to these people, understood where we come from, why we want what we want, and so on. So if your answer is yes to that, I think you have a pretty good indication that you've managed to influence somebody or have an influence on an issue. And the really nice thing is influence can happen in a million different ways. My job as Liechtenstein's ambassador here is probably the best possible job in the world because you have so much freedom how to go about this, exploring that freedom to me has always also had a sort of this aspect of creativity, which I very much enjoy. I have to say that maybe there's also another angle to this, since you asked about, how influencing has evolved throughout my career, for example, And as I said, I talk to a lot of students, for example. I'm always asked by them if I have any advice, on what studies they should pursue or what career to choose. And my answer is always the same. I think you should do what you most like to do, because chances are best that you'll be good at it. And if you like something and you develop a skill for it, that is when your chances are really best to be a positive influence. I think if you have that mindset, there's really no limit to what you can become and how you can evolve into new and different roles. For me, that was certainly the case in my life. And I think the approach also helps you to keep an open mind for opportunities coming your way. It may also at times, give you the courage to push ahead at times against barriers, internal or external. But, focus on what you like to do. It's a really good guide on being a good influence on certain issues.
That's great advice. Ambassador Sparber, this has been such a great conversation. Of course, we started by talking about a very visible moment of influence, throwing out the ceremonial first pitch at a Major League Baseball game in front of tens of thousands of fans and countless more, I would assume, on TV and on social media. And you were very happy to have done that well and not be one of the moments that has gone viral for the wrong reason. But we heard about the important role of a diplomat influencing American leaders and the American public, telling the story of the impact that your country makes. You talked about, manufacturing and industrial, economic impact, so forth. And even laying a wreath at Arlington National Cemetery to honor an American with Liechtenstein heritage who died in Pearl Harbor. And I think hearing some of those examples of sort of the visible things you get to do was really powerful. But then we talked also about some of the less visible things that a diplomat has to do, anyone has to do to influence, but really important in your role and the development of FAST, the program that you all spearheaded to tackle major global challenges like human trafficking that's now part of the United Nations. And I think a really important lesson that came out for me was whether you are seen on the world stage or in your industry or space as a big player, or maybe you would be perceived as a small player, you can punch above your weight to influence and make a major impact. And you shared some great advice about that, how you can build credibility and influence and do that through consistency, do that through a focus on your expertise. In the FAST example, the financial services expertise that you leveraged, and that as a small player, sometimes you have to be better to be taken seriously. But with that focus and that persistence, you can certainly do that. And then the last thing that just came away, that I came away with, was this two-way street of influence and how you show up in person to do that. But I think it's worth mentioning online, there are many ambassadors who do not even have their own LinkedIn page for their personally. And that's something that, you've decided to leverage. It took intention, and that, you're reaching out to people and making those connections. So in today's world, building those relationships offline is really important, but you're complementing that by nurturing those relationships online on a platform like LinkedIn. So just so many great lessons. I hope our guests came away, I know they did, learning not only a little bit about Liechtenstein, but a lot about you and some of your lessons for influence that they can take away. So thank you for being with us today and sharing your story and your advice.
Thank you to you for having me in this conversation. It's been a pretty wide-ranging one, and I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.